أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا حبيب إله رب العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد ولعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to question time. As we all know that we are looking at the Islamic family law for about a couple of months now, and it's quite extensive, and I always emphasize that it is quite important to be aware of the family law, because the practices that we have in our communities is purely based on, or majority of the time, or predominantly based on culture that we are brought up in, whether that culture be an Arab culture even, or that be, for example, Indian, Pakistani, or whatever nation that one belongs to, because culture plays a very amazing role in terms of influencing the communities and the societies and the human beings. So now, in order to enhance ourselves with a deeper understanding of family law, and that we do not make error in our dealings, I have started discussing this phenomena of family law in Islam. And this way we will be helping ourselves, and also not crossing the limits and the boundaries set by Islam, and getting rid of our ignorance as well in regards to the family law. Now, last week we kind of looked at the issue of child custody, and we finished that subject of child custody. Today we would like to look into adoption, obviously as it is related to children, so we are going in an organized fashion. We looked at first of all marriage, divorce, marriage, then you have the dowry, then you have the maintenance, then you have the divorce, then we looked at the child custody, and now we are looking at adoption. When we look at adoption, often ask a question that, is adoption allowed in Islam? If it is allowed in Islam, then what would be the implication of it, such as if there be a girl who is adopted, will she become mahram to the father? Or if there be a boy who is adopted, or her sort of stepbrothers, if there be a boy who is adopted, will he become mahram to the mother after reaching the age of bulugh? And will he be mahram to the siblings, step siblings, to the sisters, stepsisters? First and foremost, if we look at a bit of a background I would like to provide you in regards to adoption. Most of the time, the reason we tend to look into adoption is because we would like to help the poor. That is one of the main driving force behind the adoption. Taking care of an orphan, for example. Well, by the way, adoption is not necessarily that you adopt an orphan. You can even adopt a person who is not an orphan as well. I mean, the laws within Islam and in the West in regards to adoption are quite similar. However, there are some differences which I'll point it out to you in a bit from now. But returning back to the question, that adoption is usually engage, or a person engages oneself in adoption because that he wants to help. He wants to take care of an orphan, and it's a good act. Well, no doubt, however, we got to separate the domain of helping with the adoption, because each and every one of them has its own implication, has its own sort of rulings towards it. It's not the case that as it's good to help and assist, so you adopt a child and then you trespass many of the Islamic laws and ruling. For example, an adopted child have no right towards inheriting from the parents, but you kind of push the agenda that the child inherits everything and your own children does not inherit. So according to the Islamic ruling that has been set for the natural inheritance. So this way one would say that, okay, adoption is so good, adoption is so being helpful, so let's basically put all our eggs in that basket, so to speak. And while doing so, we'll be trespassing many of the Islamic rulings or laws. Or adoption is so good that if there be a na-mahram, na-mahram girl, if one is adopted, then she should be very close to the adopted father, so she can be, for example, without hijab, in order to feel the closeness, just like the other stepsisters that are there. So don't want to make them sad, so on and so forth, hurt their feelings. So, but within Islam there are certain rules that is very much necessary to be implemented. Then when you look at the side of the helping an orphan, that is in its place. Now, moving ahead in regards to the rule of adoption. Now, as an history, when we look at, for example, this concept of adoption was quite quite well known within the Arabs, and people used to practice this adoption within the Arabian society. And one of the greatest example that you would find is obviously the Prophet himself, who had adopted Zayd bin Harith, and it's a famous one, and the Quran also clearly points out to this reality that nor has Allah made your adopted son your sons, such in only your manner of speech by your mouths, but God tells the truth and He shows the way. Call them by the names of their fathers, that is better in the sight of God. Now this is one of the rules in regards to adoption, because Zayd, who was adopted by the father, let me tell you the story of Zayd and how he was adopted. Zayd came along with Hazrat Khatija to the Prophet when they got married, and he was in the house of the Prophet, and eventually what happens is that he accepted Islam as well, one of the first ones, from the first ones who accepted Islam. And after that, the father Harith came to know that Zayd had accepted Islam. The uncles came to know that Zayd had accepted Islam. That was a bit of certain flags were raised, and then eventually what happens was that Zayd, when he pronounced or when he accepted Islam, the father got really furious. The father got furious, and as soon as the father got furious, he said that you are no longer my son. And when the father said, you are no longer my son, then the Prophet was there as well, because Prophet was the one who freed Zayd, because Zayd was taken captive by the thieves. So the father came to the Prophet, and he complained, and this is what happened. The uncles came, and then the Prophet freed him. Prophet bought the slavery from them, and Prophet freed him, and then Zayd was with the Prophet, and he accepted Islam, and the father got upset as he accepted Islam, and he said, that's it, you're no longer my son. And at that moment the Prophet said, he's my son. So that is the story of adoption of the Prophet of Hazrat Zayd. Now obviously Zayd got married with Zainab, and that didn't really work as well. Then the verse came that the Prophet can marry Hazrat Zainab, and she got married. They got married as well. That was another sort of ruling, that you could marry your stepson's wife. They are not mahram to the father-in-law. All in all, these rulings that came about was to point out to these, the laws within Islam, and Prophet practiced that, and Prophet showed that, because marrying a daughter-in-law was against the Arab norms. Now, and Prophet was very reluctant for that, marrying the ex-wife of Zayd, for example, right? And what would people think, as it is the norm of the Arabs that the Prophet but God overwhelmingly emphasized. God kind of forced him. God kind of said, Prophet wanted to avoid, Prophet didn't want to get involved in that at all, but God eventually pushed him and made it sort of an obligation upon the Prophet that he do so. And Prophet did that, and by that it breaks the idols of that sort of wrong culture that it was amongst the Arabs. Now, that is in the margin, which I just mentioned in regards to marrying the stepdaughter-in-law. Now, here the stepson, as we are talking about adoption, or stepdaughter. Now, when Zayd becomes the adopted son of the Prophet, then people started calling him Zayd ibn Muhammad, because he became the son. He's no longer son of Harith. Harith disowned him. So Zayd is known as Zayd ibn Muhammad. And he was well known for that. Now, eventually, what happens in Medina was that this verse came, the verse which I just recited, that in the sight of God, it is better that you call by their father's name. So this becomes the rule, right? Nor has He, Allah, made your adopted sons as your sons. So an adopted son will never become your son. So Zayd was never a son of the Prophet, right? And obviously this becomes the ahkam, this becomes the law, that the God is saying the adopted sons are not your sons. Such is only your manner of speech by your mouths. For example, you say Zayd ibn Muhammad. You may be saying Zayd ibn Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it is just a speech by your mouth. Your adopted sons are not your sons. But God tells the truth, right? And He shows the way. God is the one who shows it. Call them by the names of their fathers. That is better in the sight of God. So he should be called not Zayd ibn Muhammad, but he should be called Zayd ibn Harith. And after that, then another verse which came, Ma kana Muhammadun Aba Rajul, right? Another verse came that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not the father. In that verse, very clear, God points out to that the name of the Prophet is taken, because Zayd ibn Muhammad, they were saying. So here that name clearly came, that Muhammad is not the father of any man. He's not the father of any man. And in this verse clearly says, so now a rule comes within Islam. Yes, adoption, it is something that is allowed and it is practiced, and Prophet he himself adopted Zayd. He says he's my son, and he was an adopted son. But the name, the family name, have remained. Family name in the Arabs were like the son of Harith, for example. Now here in the West, what we have is that if somebody adopts a son, the name of the adopted person, for example, if it's for example, I don't know, Joseph Williams adopts, I don't know, George Michael, for example, then now this name of the family, which is Michael, will be changed to George Williams. It is one of the laws that needs to take place. But within Islam, it's not the case. Within Islam it says that no, that the adopted son must be made aware of his roots, or the adopted daughter must be made aware of his roots, and the family name of the adopted one must remain with him, so that the genealogy cannot be veiled. It needs to be disclosed to the person who one have adopted. So it is quite important for them to let them know that where they belong to. Now, the second ruling is that if the adopted son or the adopted daughter is at an age which is not in an age of breastfeeding, for example, it is not fed by the adopted son, is not fed by the mother, the adopted mother, is not feeding for 2 days, one whole day and one whole night, according to some Maraji. Some say 3 days, some say 72 hours. There are different sort of opinion. However, let's take it for the minimum, which is, that she should really feed the child for complete 2 days. Let me give you the exact ruling here for you, and that is, for instance, the adopted child must be fed. It should be someone who is below 2 years of age and is also breastfed directly by the adoptive mother for at least 1 day and 1 night. Right? They needs to be breastfed by the adoptive mother, and must be less than 2 years of age. Now, if that happens, then this child will become mahram. But still, the question of inheritance remain. It's not talking about inheritance yet, because there's every rule has its own implication, like as we said. So the child will become mahram if it is directly breastfed by the adoptive mother, and if the child is less than 2 years of age. Now, if this happens, then the child is mahram to the sisters, the stepsisters. The child is mahram to the adoptive mother. So no problem. But if the child is over 2 years of age and is not directly breastfed by the adoptive mother, then the child will remain non-mahram to the adoptive mother, and if it be a daughter, to the adoptive father, and if be a daughter, she is now mahram to the brothers, siblings, the step brothers that are there, and they can get married. There isn't any issue of them getting married, because it's non-mahram. It's a completely different genealogy. The steps brother or sister or whatever is completely different. But within the Western sort of norms, we don't see this taking place. The father's family name changes. Apparently the law of inheritance also applies. He tends to inherit the estate of the adopted father. So here, as we move along, that is in regards to the mahram and na-mahram, adoption is allowed, but the issue of mahram and non-mahram will remain. Somehow one have to be very careful. If the child have reached to that age, that he has to, the mother have to wear hijab, the sisters in the house need to wear hijab, and if there be a brother, this adoptive girl must wear her headscarf in front of the step brother that is there. Now, in relation to the inheritance, that is the rule, and that is that the adoptive children, they do not inherit from the parents unless or until the adoptive mother or adoptive father makes a will and give it from the 1/3 of which they are 1/3 1/3 of which they are allowed to give, apparently. Inshallah, when we'll be doing the laws on will, we'll look into more detail, about will. However, it's better to do the law of inheritance first, and then after that we'll look into the law of writing will and what are the rules and implications in regards to will. Now, going back onto the inheritance right for the adoptive son or daughter, as it is from the required amount or will that one tends to give from, which belongs to the deceased, for example, it doesn't really matter how much is given. If it be a boy, how much is given; if it be a girl, how much is given. For example, unlike there are certain implication that comes about in a regular law of inheritance. You see what I mean? So if it's a boy or a girl, there's a difference in terms of the law of inheritance, right? So that doesn't really apply in case of an adopted son or a daughter, because you're giving it from from what belongs, in which you have the right to give. You could give all of it to that adopted son or a daughter, or you could give it to the charity, or you could do whatever you want. So the ruling of being male or female, boy or girl, will not apply there. Now, the other way of transferring or making sure that the adopted son or daughter inherits, if one wants that, and that is transferring the property to the name of the adopted son or adopted daughter while one is still alive. That is another way that a person could really transfer that the property. Now, that is in regards to the inheritance. Now, there are a few things that I just want to summarize very quickly. Obviously, the responsibilities that comes about is very, very how shall I say, important when you have adopted a child, and particularly when it comes to an orphan. Orphans needs to be taken care of in a very delicate way, right? Unfortunately, when we look at these foster homes or orphanages, are we really taking care of the orphans the way the imams used to take care of? What is the root of these orphanages? Where does it really come from? Obviously, if the community is trained in such a fashion that the orphans are taken care by the community, by the people who have that sort of insight or that sort of how shall I say, economical viability, then we don't really need orphanages the way we have. Imam Ali would take care of the orphans in such a fashion that they will not know that they will regard Imam Ali as a father, as their own father, right? In a very loving, kind and caring way, without making them realize that they don't have a father, right? But today, when we look at the way orphanages function, is quite, it's a question mark. You kind of show the picture of the orphan on TV and make the whole world know that this is orphan. What sort of psychological effect will have upon the child when he grows an adult, if he goes through some of the posters or pictures or AdWords that his picture was shown to the whole world, that this is an orphan, and give him some money or give her some money. What sort of psychological effect will have upon the child, right? So we tend to the methodology that we use in regards to taking care of orphans, we really need to rethink and revisit. Yes, no doubt, as it is in the West, the same law applies within Islam as well. The responsibility of taking care of the orphans is by the government. If there be an Islamic government, the government must take care of the orphan if nobody is taking care of, just like how we have in the West. But if we do not have a government, then what? Is this the right way of having these orphanages, or shall we really engage or entertain the methodology of adoption, that the child is adopted, the child is taken care of, just like and the child is provided with the love of a father and of a mother and of a family, right? The child is provided with that love, so that we provide a healthy member to the community, rather than providing something who is affected by it. So it is quite important to really revisit the methodology of taking care of orphans. And there are difficulties and problems in regards to adoption, but I personally would entertain or engage or recommend, if one is able to adopt, especially today when we look at how children are suffering with this war in the Middle East. It is very unfortunate that the most who are suffering are children. In Yemen, in Syria, in Bahrain, in Egypt, in Palestine, everywhere we see the children unfortunately are suffering the most. In Pakistan, they are suffering the most. The fathers are being killed, or the children, they themselves, as we look at the recent bombing, a great condemnation for that which took place unfortunately in Syria, right? So we see that children suffering, and it is it's quite sad to see that. The civilization, the perfection of a civilization, the kamal, the beauty of a civilization is measured when the oppressed ones are taken care. When those who are weak, they are taking care. Those who are weak, they are empowered. Then that civilization is great. Then that civilization is perfect. Then that government is perfect. Then that government is great. If the weak are empowered. Now when we look at the whole world and we see that the children are suffering the most, the poor are suffering the most, the women are suffering the most. So this clearly points out to this postmodern civilization as the worst civilization. Today modern man is so proud of himself, landed on the moon, the technology, everything at his fingertips, but it is the worst civilization that one could really imagine today. Because the children are suffering the most, because the women, the weaker, are suffering the most. It is so sad that even after so much of advancement of our technology, so much advancement, in terms of the progress and development, still we have famine, still we have poverty. Man, with all this power, with all this money, with all these weapons, have not managed to get rid of poverty from earth. What a shame. What a shame. Are we really proud of ourselves having, so much of technology, landing on the moon, mission to the Mars? We are proud of it. You haven't taken care of your own flock, your own sort of, species. You haven't taken care of them. There are still people, problem of hunger, food, problem of clean water still exists on this earth. And you are talking about conquering, mission to the Mars. You're talking about colonization of Mars. You know what I mean? So I personally would recommend in the end to really look into and revisit the phenomena of adoption in the orphanages. Are we really taking care of them the way we are supposed to take care of them or not? And engage oneself into the rules and laws of adoption, inshallah. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight for the question time. We looked at the rules of adoption. There was a question that was raised in regards to adoption. For example, can the adopted child be mahram or na-mahram? We covered that. The child cannot be. The question of inheritance, it could be given from the will, which they have the right to, for example, the deceased, and then also the question of genealogy and the name. It cannot be conceived from the adopted child. You have to really know, let them know. Not that, for example, letting them know in the negative way. They are still a child and you kind of inform them, but you would inform them perhaps when the time is right. Thank you and goodbye.